What do Nosferatu, Edward from Twilight, Lestat from Interview with the Vampire, and Stefan from the Vampire Diaries have in common? They all have the same real-life inspiration. And it's not Count Dracula, but rather Petar Blagojevich, a simple Serbian peasant from the 18th century. It all started when, after his death, his body decomposed in an unusual way. Petar Blagojevich, the goal that started it all. Today, vampires are one of the most popular mythical characters in pop culture. Major films are still being released, like Renfield with Nicolas Cage in 2023 and a remake of Nosferatu starring Willem Dafoe in 2024. Nosferatu is a unique case of a black and white film from a century ago remaining interesting to modern audiences. In total, over 270 films have been made about Dracula alone. But originally, vampires were just a local legend among Eastern Slavs and Balkan peoples. International interest in the phenomenon was sparked by the case of Petar Blagojevich. In his youth, Blagojevich was a haiduk, a rebel fighting against Ottoman rule, but later retired to become a simple farmer in a Serbian village. In 1725, Blagojevich died, and strange things began happening in the village. Soon, 9 of his fellow villagers died, and all of them reported before their deaths that the late Petar had appeared to them, laid on their chest, and choked them. The remaining villagers were so terrified they wanted to abandon the village and run. Just a few years earlier, Serbia had shifted from Ottoman to Habsburg control, and the region was under special oversight. Austrian military official Ernst Frombald was sent to Kisilova. Together with the local priest, he was tasked with official exhuming Blagojevich's body. The exhumation revealed a horrifying sight. Petar's cheeks were reddish, his body fuller than life, fangs protruded from his mouth, and his nails and hair had grown. Frombald wrote, "I saw some fresh blood in his mouth," which, according to the common observation, he had sucked from the people killed by him. The heart of the vampire was stabbed with a stake, after which he emitted a sigh. The forensic report stated, "Not only did much fresh blood flow, but other wild signs occurred, which, out of high respect, I omit." This likely referred to an erection, which the village priest and imperial emissary observed on the corpse. Today, we understand the signs of decomposition depend on the stage and weather conditions. A bloated body may appear fuller. The gases can cause blood to pool under the skin, giving skin a healthy pinkish color. And those same gases can produce sounds when the body is punctured, especially if the air escapes through the airways. But back then, people didn't know this, and the details of the event aligned well with local legends about vampires. It was during this time that Frombald heard the word upir from the villagers, though he distorted it in his report, turning it into vampir, which is vampire. His report made it into a major Austrian newspaper and became a sensation, an exotic story from newly conquered lands. Pastor Michael Rand wrote a treatise intriguingly titled, "On the Chewing of the Dead in Their Tombs." His ideas were picked up by French theologian Augustin Calmet, and Calmet's work was then debated by none other than Voltaire. In Serbia, this all sparked a vampire hysteria. Villagers began exhuming the graves of their fellow townspeople en masse, searching for vampires. The imperial administration had to urgently intervene. The situation became so serious that the Empress Maria Theresa sent her personal physician to investigate, who concluded that vampires did not exist. The Empress then issued a law banning the exhumation of graves, putting an end to the hysteria. But by then, the vampire had already become a part of pan-European culture, a political issue, a character in books, and a topic of philosophical debate. Demonic creatures that drink blood have existed in folklore as long as civilization itself. The Sumerians called such beings Utuku and Edimu. The Assyrians believed in the demoness Lilith, who seduced young men and drank their blood. Vampires also appear in the folklore of Aztecs, Chinese, Irish, and many other peoples. But the modern vampire originates specifically from the Slavic legends. The inhabitants of the Balkans, southern Russia, Belarus, and Ukraine believed that the earth might simply reject some of the dead. These were called unclean dead, nechistые. This category included suicides, criminals, the unbaptized, as well as those who died gruesome deaths. These corpses were buried at crossroads, on the borders of fields, essentially in liminal spaces outside the churchyard. Sorcerers who died were also considered unclean dead. After death, they could rise from their graves to drink the blood of their fellow villagers. In addition to this, vampires were believed to cause calamities, especially hail and drought, livestock death, and various diseases. However, Bram Stoker, the creator of Dracula, based his work not on Slavic but on Romanian folklore. As he himself states in Dracula, every known superstition in the world is gathered into the horseshoe of the Carpathians, as if it were the center of some sort of imaginative whirlpool. Indeed, Romanian vampires are fascinating. There are many types, but two main ones are strigoi and striga. A strigoi is a living vampire, one that you were born as. This can be the child of incest or a child conceived during a major religious holiday. A striga is a dead vampire, often formed from a corpse over which an animal, such as cat, dog, chicken, or mouse, has passed. Striga can also arise from unbaptized infants or those born in secrecy and buried outside the churchyard. Much like the Slavic upir, the ghoul, they spread cholera and ruin livestock. To prevent a dead person from turning into a striga, many methods were used. For instance, the corpse's nostrils and ears would be plugged, and their eyelids glued shut so that they couldn't see or hear the devil. The Romanians were so inventive that they even came up with their own Hogwarts for vampires. In Bram Stoker's Dracula, a magic school called Scholomance is mentioned. Hidden in the mountains above Lake Hermannstad, ruled by the devil himself, who takes every 10th student as a payment. Count Dracula was one of the students there, and there was no knowledge in his time that he had not mastered. The vampire story became popular during the Romantic era. As early as the 18th century, Goethe wrote the poem The Bride of Corinth, intertwining the vampire theme with a love story. In the early 19th century, Lord Byron became the prototype of the new vampire, an aristocratic figure full of dark and brooding egoism. In 1816, known as the Year Without Summer, Byron and several friends were vacationing at a villa in Switzerland. The weather was terrible, and Byron suggested that everyone write a mystical story. That day, Mary Shelley began her novel Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, while Byron came up with the plot of a vampire story. He later abandoned the idea, but his personal physician, John Polidori, remembered it, and 3 years later published The Vampire, whose protagonist was a true Byron hero and a precursor to all romantic undead figures. Bram Stoker's Dracula, published 70 years later, solidified the image of the vampire as an aristocrat with a horrifying secret, superior to mortals. Stoker also used another key element, though it was not his invention: sexualizing the vampire. Shortly before this, the Gothic novella Carmilla was published, where a female vampire seduces a young noblewoman. From this point, vampires became symbols of an unchecked thirst for power and lust. In essence, these creatures became the perfect metaphor for the dark impulses of the European aristocracy, which is what made them so appealing to readers. But the image of the vampire evolved with society, reflecting the times. For instance, in the 1931 movie Dracula, Bela Lugosi only beat women's necks. The writers instinctively understood the sexual subtext and wanted to highlight it. Later, vampires underwent various postmodernistic transformations. thrillers gave way to love dramas, ranging from Twilight to Only Lovers Left Alive. Stoker was very fortunate with Dracula's prototype. The Wallachian ruler Vlad Tepes, not without reason, earned the nickname the Impaler. He was a brutal and vengeful leader, and famous for his gruesome executions, and he also was a knight of the so-called Order of the Dragon. While it was a simply knightly order, to an English writer like Stoker, it must have seemed like exotic Eastern mysticism, especially considering that Stoker learned about Tepes from the eccentric Hungarian Turkologist Armin Vambary, who was secretly a British intelligence agent. And it gets even better. Tepes suffered from hemolacria, a condition that causes one to literally cry tears of blood. Such a figure was a treasure trove for any storyteller, though, in reality, Dracula wasn't particularly exceptional compared to other Balkan rulers. Count Dracula's cruelty pales compared to real-life vampires, the 20th century serial killers who drank their victims' blood. For example, Richard Chase from the US believed that he was ill and could only be cured by drinking human blood and eating fresh animal organs, much like Renfield from Dracula. Meanwhile, the German Fritz Haarmann, who worked as a secret agent for the police, used his position to find victims. He would take them into his home, and when they let their guard down, he would bite through their throats, killing 27 people this way. In both criminals' cases, there was a twisted sexual aspect to the crime. At one time, humanity used vampire legends to tame its collective shadow, to confront, sublimate, and even humanize violent and sexual urges. After all, modern vampire films are often dramas about human emotions or comedies, but sometimes the shadow resurfaces. Stoker wrote of Dracula, "The vampire who lives among us is as strong as 20 men. He is aided by necromancy, he is cruel, more than cruel, he is the devil himself, and he has no heart." Perhaps he was referring to the monster within us. Humanity has not yet tamed the Dracula within. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps my channel more than you know. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Natasha, and see you tomorrow.